What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and if you are new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell because we cover the Toronto Maple Leafs like nobody else does. Today, we are diving deep into one of the biggest storylines that has been simmering all summer long in Leafs Nation. And trust me, by the time we are done here, you are going to have a completely different perspective on Morgan Rielly and what his future actually looks like in Toronto. So buckle up, grab your coffee, and let's get into it. Now, before anything else, let me just set the scene for you because context matters here. Morgan Rielly is the longest tenured player on the Toronto Maple Leafs roster, and he has just come off a challenging 2025-26 campaign that left a lot of fans, analysts, and insiders questioning whether his best days in blue and white were behind him. And that's putting it mildly. This entire offseason, the conversation around Rielly has been uncomfortable, uncertain, and at times, almost heartbreaking for the fans who have watched him grow from a young kid, selected 5th overall into one of the most recognizable faces in franchise history. But here is where it gets really interesting, and this is what a lot of people have been sleeping on. Earlier this summer, TSN's Darren Dreger reported that Rielly, per his agent J.P. Barry, had given the Maple Leafs a list of 4 teams in the Western Conference that he would approve a trade to. Following up on that, Dreger said the Leafs were closing in on some trades back in late June, but didn't guarantee Rielly would be included. That's the part that hit different. The idea that one of the most beloved Maple Leafs of this generation had essentially drawn up an exit plan and handed it to management. That was the gut punch nobody saw coming. Think about that for a second. A guy who has given 13 years of his life to this organization, who has bled blue and white through heartbreak after heartbreak, playoff exit after playoff exit, and still showed up every single season. That guy was sitting down with his agent and writing out a list of teams he'd accept a trade to. That's not the action of a man who is comfortable. That's the action of someone who genuinely believed his time in Toronto might be over. And honestly, you could not blame him. After a lackluster 2025-26, only scoring 36 points, his lowest total since his 35-point age 26 season, and a -18 rating averaging over 21 minutes per night, the narrative around Rielly had turned genuinely ugly. We are talking about a player who was once considered a franchise cornerstone getting criticized from every direction. Fans, media, analysts, all essentially pointing to the same conclusion. Maybe Morgan Rielly is no longer the player the Maple Leafs need him to be. And when you layer on top of that a massive overhaul of the entire organization, a new GM coming in, a new coaching staff, new players changing the culture, you start to understand why Rielly may have felt like the writing was on the wall. New general manager John Chayka has reshaped the roster, but moving Rielly has become difficult because of his contract and limited trade market. Rielly carries a $7.5 million cap hit and has a full no-movement clause through July 2027. He also submitted a 4-team trade list, limiting Toronto's options further. So here you have this almost impossible situation. The Maple Leafs, by many accounts, wanted to move on. There were discussions happening, phones were ringing, teams were being called. But the structure of Rielly's deal made it incredibly difficult to find the right dance partner. The Leafs reportedly refused to add a sweetener or retain significant salary simply to move Rielly. That stance makes sense if Chayka believes a reduced role can revive his value. And that right there tells you everything you need to know about how this front office is thinking. They are not going to give Rielly away. They are not going to eat cap space just to clear him out of the building. If he goes, it has to be on terms that make sense for the organization, and so far those terms have not materialized. Nhl defenseman Carlo Kaleakovo explained why Toronto may prefer keeping Rielly, saying the Leafs were not just looking to give him away. They needed something in return. He said Toronto could get more value by changing Rielly's role rather than forcing a weak trade. And that perspective is key because it reframes the entire conversation. This is not a situation where Toronto is desperately trying to dump a bad contract. This is a franchise that believes Morgan Rielly still has value. They just need to figure out how to unlock it again, and that might mean using him differently than they ever have before. Now here is where the story takes a turn that honestly, a lot of Leafs fans did not see coming. Morgan Rielly says he expects to remain with the Toronto Maple Leafs in 2026-27 despite an offseason of trade speculation swirling around him. And the way he said it, the words he chose, that is what makes this so compelling. This was not some corporate non-answer. This was not a politician dodging a question at a press conference. This was a man speaking from the heart. It means more to me to be with this organization than it ever has, the veteran defenseman told NHL.com on Wednesday. I think that's because I've had a lot of time for reflection. In the end, you end up feeling more grateful and more excited. I feel like it's a new opportunity and the excitement has only grown. Read that again. He said it means more to him now than it ever has. After 13 years. After all the playoff exits. After a down season where he was getting booed and called out. After hearing all summer that teams were looking at him like a trade target. This man came out and said his desire to be a Maple Leaf has never been stronger. And if that does not move you at least a little bit, I do not know what to tell you. When Rielly told reporters for sure there was uncertainty but that this has always been the place that I want to play and then added this is home now, it reads like he's basically putting a stamp on his decision. Not just I'm still here, but I'm settled, I'm aligned, and I'm in. That is a massive statement from a player who spent the summer with Western Conference teams listed on a piece of paper. Something shifted. Something changed in how Rielly sees his situation, and a big part of that was a conversation he had with the new general manager. Rielly revealed that a conversation with Chayka after the 2026 IHF World Championship in May helped shape his outlook, explaining we had a good conversation after the Worlds, and he's got a plan. Now think about the significance of that. John Chayka came in, took over a franchise that missed the playoffs for the first time in nearly a decade, and one of the first things he apparently did was sit down with Morgan Rielly and lay out a vision. He did not treat Rielly like a problem to be solved or a contract to be dumped. He treated him like someone worth investing in, worth explaining the plan to. And that clearly meant something to Rielly, because you can hear it in every word he has spoken publicly since that conversation happened. The other massive piece of this puzzle is the coaching connection, and this one really cannot be overstated. Rielly will be reunited with a familiar face and voice in Jim Hiller. The 57-year-old, who was named the 41st coach in Maple Leafs history on June 17th, was an assistant to Mike Babcock in Toronto from 2015 to 19. During that time, Hiller ran the power play, a unit on which Rielly played a significant part. So you are talking about a player who is going into what has been a difficult stretch of his career, and the organization brings back a coach who was literally there during some of Rielly's best years. A coach who understands how Rielly thinks, how he plays, what he needs to succeed. Rielly sounds genuinely excited about the Jim Hiller connection, even noting that Hiller's view of the game has shifted a bit. But the trust is still there. That's a key for Rielly. And then there is the role conversation, because this is where the sad part and the hopeful part collide in a really fascinating way. The sad news for Leafs fans, and for Rielly personally, is that his role on this team is genuinely going to look different than it has for most of his career. With Darren Raddysh's arrival this offseason, it's likely that Rielly's power play time will be reduced heavily, demoting him to the PP2 unit as he can no longer quarterback the power play. For a player who has built his entire offensive identity around running the first unit power play, that is a significant change. That is a real adjustment to his identity as a hockey player. Expectations have naturally shifted after Raddysh took over as the team's highest-paid blue liner. The spotlight is going to focus on Raddysh, and that should allow Rielly to operate more in the background in a way that hasn't happened since he was drafted back in. But here is the thing, and this is the part that I actually think could be really good for Rielly if he approaches it with the right mindset. Playing in the background, playing in a more protected role, playing with less pressure and less scrutiny, that environment might be exactly what he needs to rediscover his game. A 40 to 50-point season is a reasonable goal for him to target. Anything beyond that will delight the Maple Leafs brass and give them more than one option to explore when discussing his future. And speaking of his future, here is a milestone that every single Leafs fan needs to have circled on their mental calendar. Staying in Toronto likely means that this season, if he plays 49 games, he'll become the sixth Leaf to play 1,000 games, passing Mats Sundin in the process. Let that sink in. Morgan Rielly, just 49 games away from 1,000 appearances as a Toronto Maple Leaf, potentially passing one of the most iconic players in franchise history. That is not just a number. That is a legacy. That is history. That is the kind of thing they put banners up in the rafters for. The 32-year-old has spent his entire 13-season career with the Maple Leafs since being selected by Toronto with the number 5 pick in the 2012 NHL draft. He is second on the franchise's all-time scoring list for defensemen with 5